Hey everyone, my name's Lisa. I run No Lettering over on Instagram, and today I'm going to show you how to create a lettering piece such as this for your journal. Since it's the New Year's, we're going to do a New Year's related quote, so I've decided to choose The Best Is Yet to Come. Alright, so let's jump straight into it. Before we can get started, let's talk a little bit about what I'm going to be using today for my lettering piece. So this is the Arch and Olive white gel pen, and underneath it is the Arch and Olive dot grid journal. It's the 8x8 inch, so it's the square one, which is one of my favorites right now. I'm also using a variety of acrylographs, mostly a blue shade because I like blue, and a little bit of a yellow and a silver for New Year's. And it's got a little bit cut off, but that is a gray brush pen. This is a fine liner, which in the 0.5 size, and of course we're going to need a pencil to start off with, and also an eraser. Okay, so now that we've got our materials all set up, let's talk a little bit about what we're going to be lettering today. So I chose the quote, "The best is yet to come," because it's a very New Year's, new beginning type quote, but you can choose whatever you'd like. But once you've decided what quote you want to do, the first thing you want to consider is what words you want to focus on. So those are going to be your bigger words, and then the less important words will be your smaller words. Once you've got that set, in my case, I'm going to make the, is, and to smaller, and then focus mostly on best, yet, and come. So now I'm just going to lay out my words without writing the words, but just give them shape. This way, if you don't like your composition after you've sketched it out, or you don't think that it's going to fit all your words, then you can just erase the pencil marks of your squares and rectangles and wavy curves, instead of having to erase all the words that you've written down. So this just saves you some time. You can also play around with different compositions. You can build out different thumbnails. For me, I'm going to go with this layout. So basically starting at the top, because the is going to be smaller, so the rectangle is smaller, best is going to be bigger, and I like to add a little bit of curves and waves to my compositions because I feel like that makes it more interesting and it draws the eyes a little bit better. So my best is going to be a wavy curve, and then is small because it's not very important, yet is going to be also on a curve, and finally come is also going to be on a wave. All right, here I'm just going to write in my words without worrying too much about lettering styles. I might add a little bit swoosh, like on the T, but mostly I'm just trying to write down all the letters and all the words that I want, just to get a general idea. And you can also play with like the descenders and ascenders of your letters. For example, the Y descender I turned into a swoop to fill in that little space under is. The ascenders and descenders are great for filling in space, so something to keep in mind. I know I mentioned that I didn't have to worry too much about lettering styles yet, but in this case I was thinking about making 2 into faux calligraphy, so I laid it out as a cursive instead of my usual handwriting monoline type lettering. And now I'm just going to do the actual lettering style. Mostly some tips. Do not do too many styles in one piece. Mostly for this one I'm going to be doing block letters, but I'm going to change them in little ways to spice them up and differentiate them across the words. But you don't want to have too many styles in one composition because it can get distracting and overwhelming for people to read. So just make sure it's legible. That's like the most important part of any composition. And then you can play around with, like, for example, I connected the S to the T. I swoosh the T to fill in some space, and then I'm just gonna make the less important words about the same size and also the same style, so I'm making them a little bit more angular block letters, like in the and in is, and I might change up to a little bit because everything is block letter and then suddenly I'm gonna have faux calligraphy is a little bit jarring, and I don't want to bring the I to because it's not an important word as opposed to the other big words out there, so I'm probably going to change that a little bit. But for now, I'm just going to continue creating my lettering styles, playing around with the letter sizes, the letter weight, curving the edges or not curving the edges. So yeah, I think I'm going to do a little banner for 2 here, mostly because I want to show you guys that you can incorporate doodles into your composition. And although it does kind of stand out when compared to the and is, that's okay because it's a small word and people's eyes are still going to be drawn to the big words first, so it's not a big deal. So yeah, continuing on, I'm just going to finish off comes. I'm doing a different lettering style, even though it's the same type of block letter. I'm just making the bottoms a little bit heavier compared to the tops of the letter. And then I'm also going to, play around with the crossbar, stick it out slightly, curve it, make it a little bit more wavy. And then add a little exclamation point because it's appropriate. All right, so now that when I'm creating this layout, I have the shape of a square in mind because that's the shape of the journal. So now I have like these little gaps that I want to fill in, and you can do it with doodles. So for this section, I'm going to do 2 champagne glasses because it is New Year's Eve, and champagne is always appropriate, I guess, even if it's not New Year's. But in this case, I'm going to do 2 to fill in that little gap that we have there. And if you need ideas of what to doodle, you can always Google keywords. So for example, in this case, I would Google New Year's doodles or champagne doodles, and you can draw from reference. You don't have to draw from your mind. I've just drawn a lot of champagne glasses, so I have that on the top of my mind. And then all these other little spots that feel a little bit empty, I'm going to fill in with stars, also appropriate, and also my favorite doodle to use to fill in space. So just keeping in mind that the layout is a square format, I want to fill in little spaces that make it seem less squarish. So that's what I'm doing here with the doodles. All right, so this is the general layout composition I'm going to stick with. So now it's time to ink. Before we ink, we need to erase. So here I'm just going to briefly use my kneadable eraser to get rid of some of that graphite. That way when we go to ink it and erase it later on, it's a lot easier. All right, so we're going to ink. Inking can be stressful. I know a lot of people hate inking. Don't blame them. I also personally don't like inking because it feels like it's permanent. And if you mess up, you mess up. But in reality, that's not true. You don't have to be precise. I mean, as clean as you can be, that's probably good. But if you do screw up a little bit or make the lines a little bit less straight than you were intending, it's not a big deal because we're going to be coloring in these letters, and then you can go back and fix them to make them smoother, straighter, or whatever kind of mistakes you make. So inking is stressful, but it doesn't have to be. If you mess up, it's okay. There are definitely tips and tricks that we can give you to hide your mistakes. That being said, though, straight lines are overrated. Your lines don't have to be straight. If they're a little bit wobbly or a little bit curvy, it's fine because that gives it a little bit more character. If it's too straight, then it doesn't give it anything special. It basically is more or less kind of like a computer. And in that case, we might as well just type out the words instead of creating a composition that's hand lettered. All right, so I'm probably going to fast forward through a lot of this inking because it's fairly straightforward. You follow your sketch. Another thing to keep in mind, though, is you don't have to follow your sketch exactly. If you see empty space that you want to fill in, you can make your letters longer, wider, or whatever. The sketch is just a guide. It's not mandatory that you follow it completely. I'm also using just mostly the same colors for the less important words, again, to detract, to make sure it doesn't detract from the big words. The big words, I will use different colors. These are just some things to keep in mind. Generally, I do black and white lettering, so everything is black, or I leave it white. But I know people like color, so when you're picking your colors, you can do all the same color, different colors. That's completely up to you. And here you notice that I've actually made a mistake. I was going to make everything very angular, but when I went to ink it, I ended up making it more curvy. But that's okay, because it's also a style. Anytime you make a mistake, you can just call it a style. Whoops, I guess I forgot to hit play and I'm missing a video of me inking the champagne glasses and the stars. So for the stars, I decided to use a silver color because I thought that would make it more festive, but it's not showing up very well on camera. And sometimes that happens because of the lighting, but we'll fix that later. Now we're just gonna color everything in, and that's probably, I always find coloring things in takes the longest, so I'm definitely gonna be speeding this up. All right, here we go. So some things to keep in mind when you're coloring in is you don't have to color it in completely. Like for instance, I'm leaving some white space because this adds texture, and I've come to realize that texture makes things look a little bit less flat. It gives it more character and more, just like having some white in it is not a bad thing. So you're gonna also notice, well, I'll bring it up later. But right now I'm just gonna color in everything. I like to color in banners and just leave the text white, which I do fairly often, especially for small banners. You can also, instead of doing a banner, just do a rectangle and then color it in, or a circle. And as you can see, I was just touching up little places that I messed up that wasn't very clean. Maybe I didn't color it very inside the lines or outside the lines in this case. So it's okay to go back and touch up. All right, so as I was mentioning, this acrylograph that I have, the yellow one, is more or less out of ink, but I didn't want to throw it away because I still like coloring with it because it gives this like more texture, rough feel to the letters instead of just like a smooth color, and it gives it more dimension. So even when my pens are running out, I kind of still hang on to them exactly for this reason, to color in things, to give it a little bit more texture, to make it more rough and three-dimensional. So something to maybe keep in mind, especially if you have drying out acrylographs or acrylographs that are running out of ink. All right, so continuing on with the coloring. Now we're gonna be doing the blue. Same idea. If you've noticed, none of my coloring in of this quote is clean, smooth, one color, except for yet. When that comes up, you'll see. But mostly I like, especially if you have a thin pen or like a thin acrylograph, and it's great for like doing these rough colors that leave a little bit of light and a little bit of space to make it a little bit more visually interesting. All right, so you can see that I'm coloring really quickly, mostly because it is sped up, but also because I don't have the kind of patience. Even in real time, I color pretty fast, so I'm generally coloring outside of the line. You can see it's not the cleanest around the lines, but that's okay because I can come back and fix it and smooth out the lines after I finish coloring everything in. I won't touch up everything, but like most egregious parts, I'll do it. And that's what I mean earlier when I said that you don't have to worry if your lines aren't exact or aren't completely straight. You can always come back later and touch up with the pens. And that's the good thing about doing lettering where you color in the words instead of leaving it blank. That's a little bit harder. But when you color things in, make any mistakes, you can go back and fix it. As long as it's not like terrible. As long as you follow your sketch, generally it will be fine. All right, so now I'm coloring in the silver, and as you can see, it's not very obvious. It's like, I think it's my lighting makes it a little bit more reflective, so you can't see on paper, but we'll fix that in a little bit for photographs. All right, the other thing I like to do once I color everything in is to add some details, especially highlights and shadows. So in this case, I'm using the gel pen to add in some highlights on all my text and all my words. And the great thing about highlights is it makes it look even more three-dimensional, so it looks like it's popping off the page. And so when you're doing highlights, you just want to make sure that your light source, where your light source is, so that it's coming, so that where you put your highlights it's consistent. So for example, for me, my light source is always on the upper right corner, so that means my highlights are going to be in the upper right corner of my letters. And as long as you follow that rule, that's gonna be how you do highlights. Similarly, for shadows, which is something I also like to do, here I'm just gonna fix up my stars to make it a little bit more obvious. The black lines act as shadows in this case and makes the star a little bit more, shows up a little bit better. And also before we jump into shadows, I guess, I also outline all my blacks over again because it makes it blacker, as you can see. And also if you're using acrylographs, it's a little bit opaque. So if you go over your black lines, then it's going to cover the black lines. So going it over again makes the black pop, especially if that's what you're aiming for. And that's why I'm doing it here. Okay, now we're going to talk about shadows. Shadows going to fall the opposite side of your highlights. Again, my light source is upper right corner. So my shadow is going to fall lower left corner of my letters. And as long as you keep that in mind, you're going to be able to do highlights and shadows no problem. In the beginning, it's a little bit hard and it takes a little bit of a thinking, but once it becomes muscle memory, like I don't know how to do the other side. If my light source is coming from the upper left corner, it takes me like 20 minutes to figure out where my shadow should fall. So I tend to stick to the same side because it's faster and I don't have to like use my brain as much. So it's always on the lower left corner for me. All right, and we're just finishing off the shadows. I have accidentally smudged my black pen, so I'm going to erase it real quick. And now we're done. So this is the composition. I hope you guys liked it, enjoyed the video, it was helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment and I'll get back to you. But yeah, thanks so much for watching and have a wonderful new year.